To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
So at the beginning of the school year, I was half online and half in person. And I would miss about 3 days a week, and when I would go to school, I would spend most of the time in the bathroom. And so during the second try, we decided it would be best if I did all virtual. And I had a class with the same teacher who I had in person last try. And luckily, my friend was in that class, and my teacher was going through the list of people who were online and explaining why they were online. When she got to my name, she said that the reason this girl is online is because she is embarrassed and fails. And every time I would email her with questions about homework, she wouldn't email me back and would only email my mom. And she also wouldn't give me extra time on homework until the principal forced her to.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I have APD, which means...
So I'm legally blind. For those of you who don't believe me, because I passed well, here's my blind cane, whatever. I have some vision. I'm not fully blind. That's a misconception. Legally blind doesn't mean fully blind. Whatever. That's a whole other thing. Anyway, in class for high school, I needed all my work enlarged so I can see it, especially for math and stuff, so I could like write on the papers. And I had a math teacher my junior year who would not enlarge any of my papers because I was a swimmer and I did competitive show choir, and because I swam and was able to sing and dance at the same time, I wasn't disabled enough to have my accommodations followed, which is illegal. But that was something she said. So yeah, I don't know. That's it. There's a lot more.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I have so many stories. So I'm hard of hearing, and because of that I need certain accommodations, and I've really battled with teachers and administrators to get these. One of my teachers was so resistant to provide closed captions on videos, even though it was on my 504 plan, and this accessibility is literally required by law. But he said to me, "I'm busy outside of school. I have a life. I don't have time to make accommodations for you." I also have a Roger pen, which teachers wear around their necks like a lanyard, and it amplifies their voices in my hearing aids. Several school administrators were giving a safety presentation on the procedure of if a shooter enters, and they refused to wear the Roger pen because they, quote, had stage fright, and wearing it would have compounded on this and made it too hard for them. A girl a year younger than me also used a Roger pen, and one of her male teachers refused to wear it because he thought it would threaten his masculinity. Don't work in education if you're not going to accommodate all students.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I have had a severe anxiety disorder since I was 6 years old. I was diagnosed with it when I was 6 years old, and when I was in middle school, the teachers, I thought, were aware of this, but they weren't. So anytime that I wanted to go down to the nurse's office because of a panic attack, it caught on that my teachers thought that I was just trying to skip class, because this was like a daily occurrence. It happened every day or every other day. So I would go down to the nurse's office having a panic attack, hyperventilating, freaking out, and they would say, "Oh, you need to go back to class, you're just trying to skip it," when I was in obvious distress. This led me to actually skipping class by hiding out in the bathroom when I was freaking out, which didn't help my situation, but I didn't really notice that at the time. It got so bad that my parents had to call the nurse and the guidance counselor and make sure that anxiety disorder was on my file and they were aware of it, and also to tell them to tell my teachers so that they would stop getting mad at me whenever I was having panic attacks. So any school faculty that knew me thought that I was faking debilitating panic attacks so that I could skip class.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I have autism and a personality disorder, and after telling my teacher that, he went psh, and continued to disregard my IEP.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
For anyone that's new, I'm the girl with the dog. I have a service dog. It's not that big of a secret, and I've had a lot of issues at school. One of my bigger issues was with a substitute PE teacher. I just want to start off that even if you've been a puppy raiser for a service dog, or if you've done things for a service dog, not every service dog's the same, and not every service dog's trained the same. Anyways, the whole class, he kind of followed me around trying to pet Easton, and I said, "Hey, he's working, don't pet, you know." And my friend literally had to keep blocking him from coming at us. Now, I'm running the track because we're in PE, and we're not allowed to bring our backpacks out, and we have to keep them in the PE lockers. This includes his bowl. So there's this water fountain that has gum, leaves, under a tree that's been there for at least 20 years. My dad went to the school. So my dog's kind of dying. I let his paws up go on the fountain. I make sure he's not touching anything, make sure it's sanitary. Come back for part 2.
To To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I suffer from a disorder called massive willy syndrome, and when I was in secondary school, my teacher turned around and said to me, "Jerry, you need to buy a lunchbox and stop carrying your lunch in your pockets." And that's a true story.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I have something called Raynaud disease, which right here you could see my finger is purple, which is because there's no blood circulation in it. This is triggered by cold air, water, holding a cold drink, and it happens from my wrist to my fingertips and my ankles to my toes. So the one day I'm coming from chemistry, which is on the 3rd floor, to the basement for health class, and it's really cold in the basement. And this kicks in pretty quickly. So basically imagine this, but on all 5 of my fingers. My teacher was absent, so we had a sub. And to fix it, I have to put heat on it. So when I went up to my substitute teacher and said, I need to go to the nurse, it hurts, it's hurting me. He said, wait till I take attendance. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, let me ask again. And he goes, no. I started bursting out crying because of the pain. Part 2 is out.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
Oh, it's my time to shine.
So I have a sensory processing disorder, and some certain sounds and feelings really skeeve me out. Like I can't do wet hair, I can't do metal on my skin, and I really can't do like people talking in ASMR. And one of my classes is fully on Zoom, and my teacher kind of like whispers into the mic sometimes as like a joke to be funny. And of course he didn't know. So I emailed him and I was like, I know this seems like insignificant, but I was wondering if you could refrain from doing ASMR in class as a joke, just because it personally like bothers me. And I explained to him my condition, and he didn't respond to it, so I didn't know if he saw it or not. So then in the chat at the end of class one day, I was like, hey, did you see my email? And he was like, Mia, can you actually stay in a breakout room with me after class? I was like, okay. And in that breakout room, he goes, I just don't think it's fair what you're asking me, and I do think you're being a little oversensitive right now. Huh?
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
I've been waiting for this. I have a bunch of disabilities that cause issues with brain fog and memory retention, so I have the legal right to disability accommodations in school. And Miss Lena Erickson at Western Washington University tried to tell me I wasn't allowed to have them. She actually lied to me and told me that the entire psychology department didn't allow memory aids as disability accommodations, which is illegal, and I called her out on it. The Disability Accommodation Center told her, you can't deny her these accommodations. You could get prosecuted. And yes, the department of course allows it. She told them that letting disabled kids have disability accommodations is unfair to those who don't have disabilities. In the end, the Disability Center forced her to let me have them, but she insisted that it wasn't fair because I quote-unquote didn't look disabled. I'm not sure what someone with brain trauma was supposed to look like to her, but evidently I wasn't it.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
So I have a hearing loss, which means I wear hearing aids. Hearing aids look like this if you're curious. Hearing aids have these little batteries in them to, help you be able to hear out of them. They look like this. Like other batteries, you need to change them when they die. So in elementary school, this happens so many times. Sometimes when I forget spare batteries in my bag, there's this room in the school where you could go and get extra batteries. Sometimes when I would forget extra batteries, I would say, hey, can I quickly go get extra batteries so I can hear what you were saying? And teachers would say, no. And then I would tell them, well, it's kind of useless for me sitting in class because I'm not going to be able to fully comprehend what you are saying and understand the lesson. They always would yell at me saying, no, go sit down. And then they would ask me a question. I wouldn't be able to answer it, obviously, because I wouldn't be able to hear. Then they would yell at me. I wasn't listening. No shit, my hearing aids didn't have batteries in them.
To anyone that has a disability or disorder, what's the worst thing a teacher's ever said about it?
Firstly, I'm going to say don't watch this if you're like below the age of 12. I don't know kids these days. I don't know. But anyway, I've diagnosed gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria. I'm a tranny, basically. And my principal told me that being uncomfortable wasn't a good enough excuse. I also have an anxiety disorder diagnosed as well. And while I was having a panic attack, and when you're having a panic attack, you can't exactly breathe properly. And she told me with her face in my face about this close, so it was just like, just breathe. It normally helps. And on a side note, she also said to me that we couldn't have trans education in the school because some of the first years still believed in Santa. Some of the first years still believed in Santa.